The rock scene of the 80s was dominated by male musicians with big hair, but there was one band who emerged from the scene who was an all-girl group who nabbed a major recording contract and had some success during their career. I'm talking about the group Vixen, whose career would peak in the late 80s and early 90s with their glossy image and power ballads, but a changing musical scene, creative differences, reality TV, and death would sadly be part of the band's history. Today, let's take a look at whatever happened to the group Vixen. I just want to let you guys know that this was a request by one of my subscribers, so if you guys do have story requests, use the link in the description box below. Vixen's history began in 1980 when guitarist Jan Koenemund started a band named Vixen with her best friend in St. Paul, Minnesota. Originally, it was just the two of them playing guitar and singing, but they wanted to expand to a full band and had aspirations of hitting it big. They would find several other musicians in the St. Paul area and moved out to Los Angeles since that's where the record labels were, and of course there was a big music scene there. But one by one the band's members left, leaving Jan as the only remaining member. She would end up first recruiting vocalist Janet Gardner, and Gardner at the time was playing in several bands, including a cover band that did top 40 hits. Koenemund and Gardner, along with 3 temporary members at the time, would appear in the 1984 film Hard Bodies, performing as a band using the moniker Diaper Rash. The appearance led to a segment on the show Entertainment Tonight, as well as an opening slot for Night Ranger and an appearance on the show Cagney and Lacey. But they still couldn't nab a recording deal. They would go through some more lineup changes before they cemented their classic lineup. It was in 1981 drummer Roxy Petrucci and her sister would start a group called Madame X in Detroit. Madame X was a cover band doing songs by Black Sabbath, Van Halen, and Led Zeppelin, and they would spend the next 2 years on the road playing all over the United States, eventually making their way to California, and it wasn't just 45-minute sets they were playing, but 3 to 4 hour shows. One of Madame X's early fans would be Judas Priest frontman Rob Halford, who was living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time. So when Madame X came through town, he'd stop by their show and hang out with them backstage, and even got on stage to perform a number of Judas Priest covers. When Madame X finally went to LA, they got some considerable attention. It would be Jet Records and Sharon Osbourne's father, Don Arden, who took notice of the band playing at the Troubadour one night, and they soon got a recording contract and management deal. They would put out their first record titled We Reserve the Right in 1984, and while things were going initially good for the band, including touring Europe, and even playing the legendary Marquee venue in London and meeting Ozzy Osbourne, their label soon ran into financial trouble. Disheartened, Petrucci went back home to Michigan and did nothing for a period of time. It wasn't until vocalist Janet Gardner got her number from an ex-Jet Records employee and sent her a demo tape of the band Vixen. Loving what she heard, Roxy was initially a little skeptical, wondering if this all-girl band could actually play their own instruments, but she soon headed out back west to LA and joined the group. At one point, Roxy would even audition for David Lee Roth's solo band, but sadly she never got the gig. It was in 1984 that bassist Cher Ross was in LA, and she was supporting herself by being a session musician, playing with Australian pop singer Helen Reddy, and with the Drifters, as well as the Temptations and the Coasters. It was a gig at a venue that would eventually become the Viper Room that Janet saw Cher playing with a bunch of guys on stage. Impressed, she suggested that Cher join her band Vixen, but Cher would end up taking Janet's number and thought the idea of an all-girl group was kind of ridiculous. It was about half a year later, Cher wasn't having any luck joining other bands, recalling how she'd respond to an ad in the paper and call up bands to discuss joining them, recalling in Nothing But a Good Time. They'd say, "What? A chick in our band? Fuck off." It was at that point she came across Janet's number while cleaning out her purse and ended up phoning her, and the timing was perfect as Vixen had just fired their bass player 10 minutes prior. The band soon hit the road in an RV doing a lot of live shows. Vixen would eventually record a demo and take it to manager Alan Kovac, who was already representing Lita Ford, so he knew about dealing with female artists. Kovac would recall in the same book, "I asked one question, can you guys play? And when they said yes, I said, this is awesome. There's no rock bands that are all girls, and I told them it's a terrible business for females." Like a lot of bands, the members also got day jobs to support themselves. Gardner would work at a golf course pro shop. Vixen soon gained a pretty good following, and a lot of musicians from the LA scene soon called themselves fans, like Bret Michaels of Poison, Kevin DuBrow and Frankie Banali of Quiet Riot, and others also soon stopped by their show, just out of curiosity to see an all-girl band play. Getting gigs wasn't tough though. It was landing a major recording contract that proved to be a huge issue. In fact, the band had to play numerous showcases, only for the record labels to come up with numerous excuses and not take the band very seriously. Some labels would tell them they already had a female act on their roster or suggested they soften their sound to be more like the Go-Go's or the Bangles. The only reason Vixen actually nabbed a recording deal was because of their manager Alan Kovac. He was already representing 2 artists on EMI, including Richard Marx, and he had asked the label to trust him in signing the act and promised a great first record. The label agreed, but they held the band's hand every step of the way, it seemed. EMI was insistent that Vixen write radio-friendly songs, but they didn't put up much of a fight. In fact, Vixen was just happy to have a recording contract. The label put 4 producers on their debut record, and despite all the effort from EMI, they still weren't convinced they had a hit song by the end of almost completing their first record. The label was also insistent that they work with Richard Marx, and he would end up coming up with one of the band's biggest hits of their career, a power ballad named Edge of a Broken Heart. Peterson would recall to the LA Times, "We met Richard because he had the same management, and he just came to a rehearsal one day and said, 'Wow, you guys sound great. I'd like to work with you someday.'" Meanwhile, Janet Gardner would recall in the book Nothing But a Good Time, "When I went in to record it, there was no lyrics yet. Fee Waybill from the Tube showed up with the lyrics. I literally had no rehearsal." Vixen's self-titled record would be released in 1988, with the lead single Edge of a Broken Heart peaking at number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. They had another top 40 hit with the song Cryin, and the record would end up peaking at number 41 in the States and nearly went platinum, selling just under 1 million copies. But the band soon ran into another issue. Landing touring spots proved to be problematic, as many bands didn't want to take Vixen on the road with them because the male members' girlfriends and wives were a little jealous. They would finally get some touring spots hitting the road with Eddie Money, the Scorpions, Ozzy, as well as White Lion. Even when Vixen did hit the road supporting various bands and musicians, it became commonplace for the male musicians at the beginning of each tour to stand by the side of the stage and actually see if the women could play and sing their own songs. Other times, members of Vixen would admit that they'd be asked pretty stupid questions. Cher Ross, in telling the LA Times, like, "Did Bon Jovi put you together? Did Poison put you together? Are you girlfriends of somebody in the business?" It was hilarious. Even when the band got praise, it was still backhanded, with Kerrang! Magazine calling Jan Kunneman, and I quote, "the best female guitarist around." One big change Vixen noticed since their early years was that their audiences were changing. Gardner would tell the LA Times, "The audiences used to be just about all male, but now it's 50-50 male and female. More females have gotten into hard rock in the last few years because the music has changed. It's more accessible to the general audiences, much more song-oriented." But like so many stories in the music business, Vixen was really no different. The group had sold nearly 1 million records with their debut album. They were playing to thousands of fans a night on the road, but they were still broke. They chalked that up to how expensive making the first record was and how much money they spent making the music videos that would get a lot of play on MTV. One of the early problems with the band was that their manager and their label, and even some of the members themselves, brought in a lot of outside songwriters. Some members of the band even felt like Vixen's albums didn't really represent the group's early sound. It was after getting off the road for their first album, Vixen took 3 months off to write new material for their second record, called Rev It Up. Jan and Roxy were in one camp writing their own songs with outside writers, while the other 2 members were writing their own songs between the 2 of them. When the attention turned to their 1990 record, Rev It Up, Cher Ross revealed to the LA Times how the band was besieged with so many offers to write songs for them, even from some places that were unexpected, recalling, "When we were in writing for this record, man, we were getting phone calls left and right from Holly Knight and 1,000 would-be Holly Knights. It was weird. I can remember going to my corner video store and renting a video, and the kid goes, 'Wow, you're in Vixen, aren't you?' And I said, 'Yeah.' So he says, 'You know, my friend and I sent in a tape to your management. We really want to write songs for you.' I was like, 'Give me the video, go away.'"
Look closely at the credits on the album and you'll see that Vixen did not write most of its songs, which raises the question, just how good are they? A review of the album by Yale alumnus and Spin Magazine's senior editor, Joe Levy.
I think it's a pretty good record as records go, but why isn't it great? Because it doesn't sound that passionate. Something might have gone wrong in the studio. It sounds a little dulled, it sounds a little looted out. They should write more of their own songs. I mean, they just should, because they do basically a better job of sounding like they're having fun on their own song than they do with the songs that guys out there gave them.
Do you hope that the band will write with the next album more of its own tunes? Do you think that would be help in being taken seriously?
Definitely. Yeah. I hate even talking about the way that it worked out on this one.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely next record we'll have a lot more of our own material.
Released in 1990, Rev It Up would be a commercial failure. The band was out on the road in Europe with Deep Purple, oblivious to what was going on back in the States with the album. It was when they got back home, they were surprised with how poorly it was performing. Gardner would recall in Nothing But a Good Time, "We got home and it was kind of like nothing was happening. EMI dropped the ball. They went, well, you know, that's how it goes." One of the reasons that the label may have dropped the ball on the album may have something to do with the fact that their manager, Alan Kovac, was renegotiating Richard Marx's deal with the label, went over someone's head at EMI, and maybe EMI dropped the ball on purpose. Vixen soon lost the recording contract, and the band was still together and even contemplated writing a third album. Jen and Roxy tended to write with outside songwriters, while the other pair wanted to keep writing internally. Also adding to the tension was that the band couldn't agree on the sound of the third record, and depending on who you ask in the band, some members claimed that they wanted to add a second guitarist or fire Jan from the group, even though she came up with the name. It resulted in Vixen breaking up in the early 90s. For a short period of time, Janet and Cher were going to put together a new band under the direction of John Kalodner, but ultimately things didn't work out. Then couple that with the rise of alternative rock, and well, timing really was on the side of Vixen. Cher Ross would even admit in the same book, from 93 to the end of the decade, I definitely did not lead with the fact that I had been the bass player in Vixen. Janet and Roxy would end up reforming Vixen without the other two members and put out their third record, Tangerine, in 1998. But it was in the summer of 98 Jan sued Janet and Roxy for using the band's name without her permission. And once again, depending on who you ask, Jan was either asked to join the reunion and said no, or wasn't informed about it. Then fast forward to 2001 and the band's classic lineup reunited, but they would break up while on the road. The exact details aren't clear, but it was rumored in one news report at the time that things may have ended with a violent confrontation that resulted in Janet Gardner being knocked to the floor. Jan Kunneman would be the only remaining member of the group at this time, and she would find 3 replacements and continue the tour, playing as part of the Voices of Metal tour that year alongside Vince Neil, Slaughter, and Rat. And the new lineup of the group would release their 4th record, Live and Learn, in 2006, and the same year they put out a live record. If you guys remember the VH1 show Bands Reunited, whose mission it was to, well, reunite bands, Vixen was featured on the show, and each episode generally plays out the same way. They track down the ex-members with a camera crew and ask them on the spot if they would reunite for one show. All the members would agree to perform a one-off show for the program. The classic lineup of Vixen was supposed to once again reunite in 2013, but sadly Kunneman would end up being diagnosed with cancer and she would sadly pass away later on in the year. The surviving members would continue Vixen in memory of Jan, but over the years the band has had numerous lineup changes, with Roxy Petrucci being the only member of the classic lineup still in the group. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories.